What if love isn't enough? What if loving harder is actually making things worse?
It has to be that person's intrinsic motivation. That doesn't mean that they don't love their family.
So what if helping is actually hurting? And what if people-pleasing works like an addiction?
The other part is something that's been done despite already experiencing negative consequences, whatever harms it may be. Could be negative social consequences, life consequences, at the very least, medical, physical consequences.
In this episode, we break down addiction, codependency, boundaries, and why your love can't save someone, but it can save you.
Welcome to Empowering Women in Conversations, podcast to empower and uplift women by providing a safe space for them to share their stories and experiences and encourage the strength, resilience, and power of women. If you are tired of putting others' needs before your own, leading to burnout and resentment, and you are ready to transform and create relationships that are supportive rather than draining, join us on this journey of women overcoming adversities and achieving their true empowerment. Here's your host, a licensed professional counselor, Anita Sandoval.
Welcome back to Empowering Women in Conversations. I'm your host, Anita Sandoval, and today we're going to be talking about powerful truths, the reality of addiction. It isn't really something that people think about, and it's not always about substances. It can also be about behaviors that take over our lives, like people-pleasing. And my guest today is Dr. Eluterio Blanco, Jr., a licensed chemical dependency counselor, a nationally certified master addiction counselor, and he's a clinical associate professor in the School of Rehabilitation Services and Counseling at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, where he serves as the degree coordinator for the online Bachelor of Science degree in Addiction Studies. And since 2002, Dr. Blanco has been providing counseling services to clients with substance use disorders, working with adolescents, adults, and special populations. He has co-authored articles on the attitudes of Mexican Americans towards cannabis use, co-authored a textbook on substance use disorders, and his research focuses on reducing the stigma among healthcare providers towards living with substance use disorders. And with his extensive background, clinical and academic, he brings a very unique perspective on how addictive patterns form and how we can break them. So today we're exploring how people-pleasing can act like an addiction, how recovery can apply, and how you can begin reclaiming your voice and your life. So, Dr. Blanco, welcome to the show.
Hello, Anita. Thank you. I'm grateful and honored to be here.
And everybody knows me and Dr. Blanco, we met for me, when I was getting my graduate degree in counseling, and he was going his way in counseling. And now, many, many, many years later, here we are. Thank you for being here.
I think we were both aspiring psychologists at that time.
I know. We went different routes, let me tell you. I love psychology. For me, I wanted to get more hands-on with people, and not that you can't with psychology, is test and measurements. It really wasn't for me. I don't know about you.
Same here. When I met you, I had started working with the addiction population and substance use, and I was going to become a psychologist, but I wanted to stay in it because I found it rewarding and I loved it so much. I never moved on. Maybe later on.
No, I know that's how I feel too. And I know that you got your licensed chemical dependency counselor, and then that motivated me to get my licensed chemical dependency counselor as well. But that wasn't my venture. I know that was yours. So I love that you kept going with that. And I did my own thing here with people pleasing. And I love how now we can work together. I really want you to share a little bit about what inspired you to focus on this career on addiction studies and counseling.
It was a little bit accidental. because I did aspire to become a psychologist. That's what I studied as an undergraduate. That's what was my focus. I wanted to become a psychologist, a behavioral psychologist. And when I graduated with the undergraduate degree, I knew that where we live in Texas, I knew that you can get your license in chemical dependency counseling with your bachelor's degree because
Yeah.
that's the way the licensure and certification works. And there's a big need for it in our state. So I thought, well, I'll get this license on the way to becoming a psychologist because I was doing, you could do therapy. I was learning how to do CBT, and all of it was within the context of treating substance use disorders, treating addiction. So I learned how to do CBT, I learned counseling, I learned assessment. I was learning all that stuff. So this is great. I'm able to do this with a bachelor's degree. And went on to graduate school, getting a master's in clinical psychology. But then I felt like everything I was learning I could apply to the people with substance use disorders. And I stayed working with the population because even to this day, I feel I haven't mastered it, even though I have the national certification and I just stayed working with the population. Like I still feel there's so much that I still don't know yet and so much more that I could do
Yeah.
working with the population. And then of course, my clinical experience, a lot of counselors that I was working with and people, clinicians at that time, didn't want to work with the population, especially people with, back then it used to be called dual diagnosis, with people with co-occurring mental health disorders and substance use disorders. People did not want to treat them. They would say, no, I don't want this person. He's got this and this condition. I was like, well, I'll do it. I felt like, well, there's a need. This is
Yeah.
what I wanted to do. So that's really what and I started becoming interested in college towards the last year.
Yeah.
I was working in the social work program as a work study student, and I had access to all these journals on addiction and treatment. And I would read them in my downtime while I was there, learning more and more. We didn't have
Yeah.
a class or course or anything in the curriculum on substance use or addiction. So
Wow.
a lot of it I had to learn on my own. It's not like that now, right? Because one of my life goals is to improve that. So now we're providing a lot of education for any mental health counselor, anyone who wants to, anyone who's treating people
Yeah.
should know a lot more about substance use disorders and addiction.
Oh, I love that.
That's
Mhm.
it. And I'll make it known I'm not myself in recovery. I never considered myself to be a person in recovery.
Yeah.
Most people are who get into the profession. I'm not. I've had issues with alcohol in the past, but I don't really consider myself in recovery, not like other people who led and started this profession.
Ooh, I love how you said that because it brings me to that word addiction. People hear that, no, I'm not an addict. And then they also think drugs and alcohol only. But from your perspective, what actually defines addiction?
It's ironic because those of us who our clinician in the profession, we really don't use that term much. We shouldn't use that term much. That term addiction, if you're familiar, if anybody's familiar with DSM, the DSM-5, there is a section on the DSM in the DSM-5 on substance use related disorders, but it makes it very clear. Reading the introduction, the word addiction is not used. It's not a clinical word. It gets thrown around a lot. And it's true. So that term addiction, people very loosely apply it to other things too. I think what most people who are not clinicians and anyone who understands what addiction is, there I think everyone's understanding of addiction is a severe dependence, right? And
Okay.
there is clinically we diagnose disorders based on a gradient continuum. There are people who might have, I'm going to use alcohol a lot, right? So
Okay.
an alcohol use disorder, it could be mild, but it could be severe. And I think the severe, that's really the concept that people consider an addiction,
Okay.
a severe disorder, where it's a dependence, usually a physiological dependence. And it's difficult to change for sure. I hope that helps clarify what that term addiction means. You know,
So what I'm hearing is addiction is more of a subjective term being loosely turned, or, oh, you're an addict, you're addicted. In general, when it comes to the DSM, it really is recognized as more of a behavioral, physiological dependence on something, and having a habitual need, let's say caffeine. I know some addicts, when they come in, they want to do the 12 steps, but yet they're smoking cigarettes or drinking caffeine. And the goal is to be away from stimulant use. And that includes anything and everything, even sugar per se. So that's really hard on an addict. If you don't use addict, what do you call them?
One of the things that we also try to advocate for is reducing or eliminating the use of stigmatizing terms, because that's one of the areas of research that I'm really focused on. It's how we can reduce stigmatization in the population and even by practitioners. That's really my dissertation focused on stigmatizing attitudes towards people with substance use disorders by other practitioners too. And so using the term, and it's okay, using the term like an addict, it has been found to be a negative for the stigmatizing term is something that has a negative connotation to it. So using an addict, certainly like junkie, and it's funny because and when I'm teaching students, we go over and I let them just throw out all these words that they were like junkie, druggie, alcoholic, even alcoholic, right? Terms like that, you might not think it's a negative connotation, but it actually is, right?
Okay.
So, and it's been shown that just using or because language has so much power.
Yeah.
Using that term out loud, using the term druggie, addict, actually negative impacts you. And if you're the provider, you're a healthcare provider, mental health provider of a person, that actually negatively impacts your empathy towards the person, and so just changing language actually makes a big difference.
If you can just help me define what compulsion or loss of control, or what would you consider a problem as per the DSM? Because whenever I have people come into my office, whether it's couples or individual, I know that some of the common statements is, well, I don't have a problem, maybe because they haven't had any issues with the law, but then there's issues with relationships or justification such as, well, it's better than it was before, or I can stop at any time, and or, well, I'm doing it with so and so and you approve of them. How would you define as when it's finally a problem?
That's a really good question, and that's good. And you said it at the beginning using that term compulsion.
Okay.
The NIDA, if you look it up, the NIDAs, they have a working definition of addiction, which begins with it's a compulsive behavior pattern that results in that someone continues to engage in despite experiencing negative consequences, right? So those two parts, it has to be some type of a compulsion, which can be an obsession. Somebody's at work, but they're already thinking about leaving for the day and drinking or going out and something. And there's that compulsion that it ruminates in their mind. They're thinking about it. So this is very different from, you gave some examples. Somebody who says, oh, they just happen to go somewhere and there's a party and people are drinking or using drugs. That might actually be a little bit different. That might not fall under the compulsion. But if there's something that they're obsessing about, thinking about throughout the day, throughout the weeks and stuff, that could be part of it. And then the last part is the other part is something that's been done despite already experiencing negative consequences, whatever harms they may be. Could be negative social consequences, life consequences, at the very least, medical, physical consequences. That helps understand when somebody, because typically not everyone develops a substance use disorder and addiction. There are a lot of people who do occasionally mildly consume alcohol and drugs. And it's hard for most people to conceptualize that and think, well, if somebody's using cocaine or something, for example,
alcohol,
alcohol, cocaine, and the combination of all that, then they're probably a drug addict. Well, it's very possible that they might not actually develop the severe disorder. They might have a mild disorder, but they might never actually develop the addiction.
Since we don't use the word addict, how can we normalize a word to call that? We call it compulsion?
If we want to get very clinical with it and person first, it would be someone with an alcohol use disorder, someone with the substance use disorder, if we want to make it very general, a person with an opioid use disorder. You could use opioid user or alcohol user. That's still on the edge there, but they're usually a mouthful. It's pretty, but again, these are terms that are, if we look at, and SAMHSA, the SAMHSA, they publish a listing of all these terms, what's preferred versus what we're trying to eliminate. But there are terms like that can be used, but it's really difficult for the layperson to become engaged with that and learn what to do. I will say, for us as counselors, as clinicians, we should use those terms, right? We can't use addict. But if someone who's in recovery and they refer to themselves as an addict, or that they were a drug addict, the recovered addict, absolutely let them use that, right? Because that empowers them. That has empowered them, that they call themselves at their lowest, that they were an addict, and there's no reason to correct them. They own that term, and they're proud of their recovery. So never make that correction for them. But if it's someone else, we shouldn't be throwing those terms around.
I know you mentioned it was a physiological dependence. And I want to be able to discuss behaviors when it comes to addiction, and how people pleasing really fits into this cycle when it comes to compulsive behaviors. My knowledge of neurobiology is the compulsion, and then with what I've known in classes with EMDR on eye movement desensitization reprocessing, on how the addiction cycle works. And it's where there's something that wasn't developed growing up. And therefore, let's say in the orbital frontal cortex, let's get all foo-foo here, geeky and nerdy. And because let's say that need to belong and love wasn't really fully developed because the parents were absent or neglectful and whatnot. So then growing up now, for whatever reason, they get some attention, and then boom, firing and wiring that need of, oh, I'm loved and I am wanted, or I'm important. And they did this something, and such as people pleasing. If I give them what they want, they're going to give me what I want. And then boom, there's a dopamine release, a chemical. Well, that's still a substance, except that we're producing it our own self. And we realized, if I hit this trigger, I'll get this dopamine release. Let's do it again and again and again. And is it possible that behaviors that encompass symptoms of people pleasing, can it have a compulsory addiction type cycle?
Yes. Good. So what you just described is codependency and its origin and everything. So that's codependency. And I'll get into that in a minute. So I want everybody to understand that everything you mentioned, especially with the neural networks, I don't want to get too into the weeds with that, but we all have the potential to become addicted. Some more than others, but everyone has that potential because we all have that same wiring or neural circuitry, if you will, where we have the reward center of our brain, and we have it. It's part of our evolution. It's an adaptation, something that feels good. We developed this mechanism to do it again, to reward ourselves, but to ensure our survival, right? Which is sex, for example. If sex didn't feel good, I don't know how many people would be propagating and having more children. So that's part of it. And eating food that are high in fats and carbohydrates, and if that didn't taste good, and sugar, and if that didn't taste good, that was part of our survival back in our ancestral period, something that's still part of us now. So anyway, that's how alcohol and drugs work. And I always tell my students that it's really important to remember that it's not the alcohol and drugs that get a person high, it's the release of the dopamine in our synapses. That's where the high comes from, right? So we all feel a little bit of that high when we eat a good meal, when we have good sex, when we have good achievements, when we have achievements, right? Achievements and accomplishments give us that reward because all that served a purpose back in our ancestral time. So now you tie it in with what you said. Substance use and addiction is really a behavioral health disorder because behavioralism is part of it. Now, there's no cure, we'll get into the recovery later on. But codependency is exactly what you mentioned. I just want to bring this up, Anita, because it's not going to be stereotyping here, because a lot of what I'm sharing with you, it's already been published, and there's many publications on this. Substance use disorders are predominantly skewed to afflict more men.
Okay.
Women don't develop substance use disorders, but there's a higher proportion of men versus women who develop the disorders. Okay, which is interesting because it's converse to what you would find with like depression and anxiety, where it's highly proportioned to, affect more women than men. Not to say that men don't, but there's just a higher percentage of women than men who develop, or at least present for, depression and anxiety, right?
But if we think about it, let's think about it. So men are highly proportionate in developing substance use disorders, but women are highly proportionate to develop codependency, people-pleasing disorders, if we were to call it that. It's not in the DSM, but if it was, this is what it would be. And so it evens out. So when I have couples come in, oh, well, my husband has an alcohol disorder or a cocaine disorder or a cannabis disorder, You've been with them how many years? And if you know that they use this prior to the marriage, because there's, unless you got married within whatever, a couple of weeks and they weren't doing the thing at all, for the most part, you knew there was an issue. And then we have this ideal that they're going to change. But then who enabled that behavior? Who created that codependency? And so they want to come to session saying he's the problem because we can outright see it. Yeah. But then the issue is also, it's in a relationship, it always takes two, not just one. And it's sometimes hard for the women. And again, not I want to overgeneralize, it's just going with what the studies show, how people pleasing codependency issues enable the substance use disorders too. You can't have one without the other. And in saying that, how can they realize that this codependency or people-pleasing type of behaviors has gotten out of control where they're now in failed relationships?
Okay, yeah, a couple of things. So going back to, I do want to state that I'm not an expert on codependency.
Okay.
My focus has always been on the individual treatment, so working with individuals. But because I work in this profession, I have to know about codependency because it comes up a lot. But there's a great book. It is the literal book on codependency. It's called Codependent No More. It was written way back in the 80s, and I think they just revised it. But that's it. That's the standard. And Melody Beatties.
Beatties.
Yeah, but it's a classic.
Yeah.
Factors such as, and it typically is a woman, factors having unresolved trauma, and especially it's very likely that they had a caretaker that had a substance use disorder.
Okay.
We're just looking at general statistics. It's very likely that they had a caretaker growing up, probably the father, who had some kind of a substance use disorder, and this is where the codependency developed, because observing and watching that the attention, the focus was all on the disorder and the person growing up. So because that's unresolved, and that's kind of what was observed, the spouse usually will have those codependency tendencies growing up. And what can be done about it?
But before you go there, I just want to elaborate. Does it have to be hard stuff, cocaine and alcohol or anything illegal only, that they would develop codependency? Can it be the small stuff like cigarettes, legal stuff?
Sure, sure, absolutely. In fact, I'm always stating that alcohol and cigarettes, even though they're legal, they are just as, I mean, these are unhealthy. The problem with looking at it, the focus, anytime we talk about substances, the focus does go to that, those hard drugs, opioids, cocaine, methamphetamine, because the media and everything that we're kind of accustomed to. But look, a substance is harmful and it's unhealthy. That's again, it's because our country has viewed substances from a moral perspective. Looked at, okay, don't do these because these are illegal. That's bad for you, and you get addicted to that, then you're a bad person, and you have a bad character and such. And but alcohol and cigarettes, that's legal, so that's okay. Just don't overdo it because again, you don't have the willpower.
Yeah.
So we tie in morality and criminality and all these concepts to it. But one thing across the board, the best way to explain, nobody can deny that alcohol, cigarettes, nicotine, that is unhealthy.
Yeah.
I think everybody's clear on that. Like, there's
Yeah.
nobody that's going to deny that. Oh, if you do too much of that, it's actually good for you. No, everybody knows if you use that in excess, it's harmful to the body. We've all come to that agreement. So yeah, it can be with excessive alcohol use and so many common examples of codependency. And the other thing is it leads to resentment
Yeah.
from usually again the spouse, significant other resenting again, typically it's whomever the person with the disorder is. Let's say it's the husband, male, comes home and he drinks and leaves the bottles everywhere, leaves the cans out, and then he passes out, falls asleep. Well, he's going to need his clothes washed for work the next day and all the bottles picked up. And that's usually, right, the spouse will do that. She'll
The
pick up the
people
bottles and throw
pleasing.
away. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which can lead to a lot of resentment in
Yeah,
some,
yeah, and burnout. That's like one of the common
Yeah.
symptoms in people pleasing is over giving and resenting
Right.
them for doing something that didn't belong to them. And then they want to blame the other person for doing it, but you chose to do that
Sure.
for whatever
Yeah,
reason.
Anita, yeah, you're right. That person, again, the guy who comes home and drink, that he might not have asked for that. He might not have asked for you to pick up all the stuff. Now, there are cases where there's a kind of a power play, and the person could say, I need this, I need my clothes washed for tomorrow, I need to go to work, this and that, and manipulation. But a lot of times they don't. This is behavior, and the codependency is something
Yeah.
that the person engages with on their own, which can lead to
Yeah.
resentment and what can be done, everything that you discussed, setting up healthy boundaries.
Ooh, talk to me about that. Like, how does setting boundaries play in recovery or just
Well, I thought
making
you would be the expert on that.
No, you're my guest. You're the expert here.
The codependents will feel that the relationship will work both ways, meaning that they could and somehow change the user's behaviors, lead them into recovery. It is really important. Look, y'all, I've been doing this for a long time. Recovery is really dependent on that person's intrinsic motivation.
Yes,
right?
I love that. People pleasing myth and misconception. Number one is if I'm just good enough, if I do enough, if I love enough, that person will change. I blame Hallmark and Disney. There needs to be an attorney listening to this because they believe true love's kiss is going to change everything. And here in addiction, be it physiological, you're stating one of the studies that show time and time again, it's dependent on the person.
It is. Everything shows back to that. And this is something that going back to what I meant, it's a behavioral health disorder. So it is a health disorder, right? The person with the addiction, but it's a behavioral health disorder. So the person's behavior needs to change. External factors can try to change that behavior. No impossibility, right? Everything's possible. It could happen. Might make their spouse change, and I'm not saying it doesn't. And this is the other problem that we have. It's everybody knows someone that says, so and so my aunt said that she was going to leave, and then he quit on his own, and he stopped drinking, which is very possible. And if that does happen, that's miraculous, because that is a very low percentage.
Since we're in this subject, because this happens a lot. If they love me enough, if they love the children, if they love this marriage, they will stop. They're using the emotional love tactic on a person with compulsory behaviors. Tell me the effects on that.
It won't work. It's not effective. And if it is, if they do, let's say they abstain, let's say they do stop, it might be temporary. Because again, I can't stress it has to be that person's intrinsic motivation. That doesn't mean that they don't love their family. That doesn't mean none of again, it's you mentioned it several times. It's looking at their values and match and then pointing out the discrepancy. This goes back to motivational interviewing, right? Getting into with the user and say you say that you love your family, but the things that you're doing showing that, pointing out in a compassionate way that there's a discrepancy. But that won't, Anita. If someone who's codependent, let's say they want to separate, leave, terminate the relationship from their spouse, they can do that if they truly are putting their own happiness, love, and self-love, and if that's their priority, and even in some cases their own health priority, because besides the burnout, and this is not stereotypical, if a person, especially if there's stimulant use, stimulant dependence with cocaine and methamphetamine, a lot of studies show that they are very likely to have some STI, some sexual transmitted infection, because of high risk situations. And of course, if they inject, if they're in IV injector, they might likely have hepatitis as well. And sometimes it would actually be a health reason to leave the marriage or the relationship. But if somebody wants to leave for their own, again, self-love, for their own personal growth, that's fine. But they should not expect that would change the person. That they should not expect that would change the person's behavior. So threats, making threats about terminating the relationship, making threats about leaving, that's not going to lead to change.
Would that help the relationship?
It might help the person. Again, if the person is seeking to improve their self-love, the codependent, if they're seeking to improve their self-love and their personal growth and their own mental health, then it probably would. But sometimes, yes, it does. Sometimes the user, that might be the event that causes them to really choose to change, make that behavioral change. What I want to share is there's a study I came across where the two biggest factors are that it's the person's intrinsic motivation. There's several stages of change, right? There's a pre-contemplative stage. I don't want to get too into it, but there's some mindsets where a person is not ready to change, not ready to recognize the change. Even though a spouse can point out all the harms and all the hurts, but the person really, in their state of mind, cannot recognize that. And sometimes they can later on.
It's their resilience level. They can't handle that distress, that change yet. It's like telling a child, I need you to walk now, when they've been so used to being carried. There needs to be a transition to build that bridge to overcome. And when somebody goes, we're going to go from this to this. And think of it as within the stimulants, your brain is so used to this chemical doing the work, going from that to nothing. And then you're going to have withdrawal effects. And if this person isn't ready to function with their emotional intelligence to deal with that tolerance, distress, they're not going to be able to change. And it's not that they don't love you, it's that they themselves haven't evolved to manage that emotional distress. And no amount of, oh, I love you, I'm going to handle this pain. You don't know the demons that is in here, that everybody carries some type of pain and that they need to overcome. And their subconscious mind will only share when it's ready, because if not, we wouldn't function. Our mind is going to go catatonic. And then something I always say is, when the person isn't ready to change, but they're scared that they're going to leave them. They're using this threat as I'm going to leave you, but they really can't handle to manage to change just yet, because there's something underneath that they haven't even realized yet. That's where therapy comes in. But they do it because of the scare of being abandoned. They're going to resent that other person. They're not doing it for themselves. They're doing it for the other person. And they're going to go, I hate you because I hate myself right now. I don't like myself the way I am, because they're not getting that dopamine kick or whatever stimulant that they're getting to get that fix, to tolerate whatever distressful stuff is happening in them that they are not ready to unpack. And we're having a fake relationship. The other person's happy, but they're not. They're miserable until one day it explodes. What happened? You didn't allow them their journey. And then let's go over to the other side, the codependent person, people pleasing person. They're saying, if you love me, you'll change. If you love them, stop people pleasing, stop enabling. But they say, but it's because I love them, I do this. Sometimes helping is harming.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's part of that book, Codependent No More. It becomes a detriment to both. And it does.
And it goes both ways. If you say, if you love me, you'll stop. But then if you love them, stop enabling and stop being codependent. Don't clean up after them. Don't take them out of jail.
There's another concept about systems and homeostasis, because we're all resistant to change. We don't like change. We like things the way they are, whatever they may be. And it's when it's time to change something. There's forces that push towards maybe you might want to change, but there's also forces that keep the change from happening, keep things sustained, right? So there are there's positive feedback which guides towards change, but there's also negative feedback that goes back to change. So I bring this up because this happens sometimes when people, and again, usually the male and the family, they go through recovery. They recover, and sometimes the spouse or codependent is not prepared for that. They actually do things that might revert the behavior back to, or at least they're not really accepting of it. I always use this example because I had a man who did want to stop drinking. He wanted to be a better father, better husband, for everything, and he did. And so instead of going out all the time, he would stay at home, and the wife and his kid, they were not used to that. So now he was home, and they were very confused, and they would bring this to the session. He's here all the time. He sits here. They were used to him not being there, and the kids would watch whatever they wanted to on TV, and now he's there, and they all had an issue with it. And the man brought it up. It's like, isn't this what you all wanted?
Yeah.
Sometimes it might be latent behavior, but sometimes the codependent, they have to recognize whether or not they're pushing that back in the person's recovery.
Yes, and let's think of it intrinsically. You're wanting them to change intrinsically, but that means you need to change too, because we're all like a web. And so if they're changing, and this is the thing, oh, well, they need to change, not me, because I'm not the problem. But when, let's say they do change, right? And then they don't change, and they think, well, this isn't working. There's something that he must be doing, or she, or whatever. No, what are you doing? What are you doing to change? Because this does take two. And that's when they're like, well, I'm not ready. And then it's like, well, you can't pin it on him, because then you're doing what you were doing before. I'm taking his responsibility and my responsibility. But with the enabling, there's a movie, a film therapy, that I highly recommend, When a Man Loves a Woman, with Meg Ryan. That's what it talks about. She would get upset because he would enable the behavior. And she would say, stop, this is me. I have an addiction, compulsory, with alcohol. I need you to see me and have the relationship built on this. It was so powerful, that movie. Highly recommend it.
And it's harsh, again, for someone who is a people pleaser, who's codependent to you, because you're going to come against a lot of resistance, and they don't want that, and they want to be adored and loved, but I'm not saying that you should be confronted. Here's the second part, and I mentioned what's the most important factors in a person fulfilling their recovery, going through recovery. I said that intrinsic motivation, that's at the top. That has to be there.
Okay.
The other part is that person needs to have confidence that they can recover. So that might be a part where the codependent can shine. Help that person gain that confidence that they can change. Anything that would improve that person's confidence, because the person might feel like, hey, I don't know if I can do it. So any statements, hey, you're never going to change, or those are not helpful at all. The person needs some kind of confidence.
So for people pleasers, it would be something like, whoa, I heard you say no, or something, because my husband always tries to help me with my people pleasing. And this was many years back, by the way, because I'm in remission now. And I remember he said, where do you want to go eat? And I'm like, I feel like brisket or barbecue, whatever, right? He's like, well, I feel like Vietnamese. And I'm like, okay, we can go there. He's like, no, you said you wanted this, so we're going to do what you said. And you don't need to be people pleasing. And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even realize. And
Mhm.
so honoring on both sides
Right.
that addiction might creep up, and instead of shaming them, like, look at you, you're doing this again, but say, hey, did you notice this?
Mhm.
And it's okay. What can we do? Let's move
Yeah.
forward. Being compassionate about it
Mhm.
and more solution focused, like what can we do to move forward and no judgment? That would be amazing. And let's talk about, because I know you mentioned confidence, right? Ways to stop
Mhm.
this addiction, behavioral and or substance use. How do 12 steps work when it comes
Okay.
to breaking or managing these compulsory behaviors?
Okay. This is good because I was about to bring up like I know you want to discuss moderation
Yeah,
management.
we'll
We'll
do
start
that.
with the
That was
12
right after. So
because
yes,
because
definitely.
and so the AA 12 steps, that's very traditional. This is where the profession, this is what addiction treatment was all in the last couple of centuries, right? It
Okay.
is AA is a complete surrender. The first step is the person admits that they have a problem, that they cannot manage their lives because of the addiction, because of the substance use, and
Yeah.
turning over and surrendering to a higher power, right?
Okay.
Being given all that. It's very spiritual, and there's nothing wrong with that, but there's a lot of spirituality in it. The thing with AA is that it really it's determined defined by total abstinence from a substance. So the person has to take it day by day, and sometimes that might be what the person wants, right? They don't want, and I'm going to use alcohol, right? Because it's based on alcohol. They don't want to drink anymore. So day by day, they turn it over. They wake up. They turn it over to a higher power that they not drink for those 24 hours of that day.
Okay.
They recognize that if they start drinking again, their life will become unmanageable, whatever that means. Their life
Yeah.
might become terrible. They feel like, and this is the manifestation of what we know is the disease concept, right? If somebody stops drinking, their body will heal, but once they drink again, their body just becomes a wreck. And they'll go back to the disease, to the disorder, which was alcoholism. They can't
Mm.
have anything to drink.
Does that apply to behavioral compulsions such as people pleasing?
It can. It can because there's Al-Anon. If your listeners are not familiar with Al-Anon, because AA again, and this is perfect, like perfect illustration of codependency. So there's AA for the drinker, for the person, and then there's Al-Anon, Al-Anon, which is for usually the spouse or the family member.
Yeah.
They might not have the disorder, they might not have the alcohol problem, but they're in the relationship, so there are support groups designed for that. So a lot of that is on codependency and what is it like to be a spouse with somebody who has alcoholism or an alcohol use disorder. So and they use the same concept. So they're powerless to change the person's behavior. They're
Yeah.
powerless in changing the person's addiction.
I think that's the first step in when it comes to people pleasers or codependent
Mm-hmm.
behaviors. It's accepting that you can't change others or tell
Yeah.
them what to do because they have that choice to say no. And just that concept of I was expecting this and I'm like, well, that's on you, your thoughts, your emotions with these
Yeah.
expectations. You're not seeing for what it is. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I created a 12 steps for people pleasing to
Good.
help women with these behaviors because more likely than not they end up in failed relationships from people who have some type of behavioral compulsory and they wonder what I made sure to give them everything they wanted, which even ties to I'll give them all the love they want, I'll give them all the sex they need, and yet still it's not enough. Well, because what they have or what they use for their own addiction is something that they have totally different, and it's not
Yeah.
like you said, it's intrinsic. Just because you give
Mm-hmm.
them, you want to become their drug, doesn't mean that they're
Yeah.
just going to solely rely on you. and
Right.
give that back. So that's the
Yeah.
hardest.
And it's important that they just don't lose hope. As a codependent, don't lose hope that that person can change. That's probably the only, really, for yourself, that's probably the best thing, is just to and continue to have hope. But understand that given all that, you can't really make another person change. They're going to
So,
have to.
okay,
Mhm.
let's not lose hope they can change, but when do they start putting themselves to know when is when? They have to allow them that space for them to move on.
The same way that a person with an addiction would go decide to begin recovery. And someone with codependence would have an epiphany, decide that their self-love, that their personal growth is more important. And that's all what codependency is, right? Codependency, people pleasing, is putting the person, their own needs, the user's needs ahead of their own all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It has to get to the point where the person makes a decision, has their own motivation to have their needs above all others.
Releasing.
That's it. That's how they enter recovery. Seeking that self-love, seeking that growth that they want, that they probably never had. Whenever they make that decision, that's it.
Yeah, I love it. I love how you said release. You release them to be responsible for
Mhm.
their recovery, while at the same time, they learn to recover themselves, to self-care and love themselves, and not have others take care of them
Right.
for whatever
Yeah.
emotional needs. So,
Yeah. Which is, like I
beautiful.
said, if the person who's codependent chooses to leave a relationship, it should be for that reason, not with the expectation that the other person is going to change or enter recovery from
Oh,
their addiction.
that was powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And moderation therapy. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. Moderation management, completely different from what I mentioned from the traditional AA. What's been shown is AA and abstinence only treatment and recovery. It's good for some, but it's not for everyone. All right. It took us a long time as a profession to understand that, because that's all it was. Our profession began and grew out of these AA support group meetings, right? Which is good because, again, it's fellowship, and a lot of
Yeah.
people do like that spirituality in it. Spirituality is an important part of recovery.
Okay.
There's been a lot of studies that show that some people need more, or some people need something else. So moderation management is very controversial because it falls under harm reduction, which the goal is not abstinence. The goal is a reduction usually,
Okay.
or any type of progress is recognized. So a person doesn't want to quit drinking, but they want to drink less, you know. And I don't want to get all drunk. I don't want to get intoxicated, but I still do want to drink occasionally here and there. All right. And moderation management supports that. And there are moderation management groups. There's guidelines on what moderate drinking is. And moderate drinking is 2 drinks of alcoholic beverages per day for a man. For a woman, sorry, it's 1, just because bodies are different. So, but there's guidelines where, if people can practice these limits and stay within these guidelines, it's considered moderate. And it's successful for some people, not for everyone also.
Is it
It shouldn't
highly
it shouldn't be
successful or not successful?
It is, because of what I mentioned earlier with those 2 factors. If a person, so a person with let's say with a somewhere between a moderate to severe alcohol use disorder, all right, they begin therapy, they become treatment, and whoever the counselor recommends, okay, so the goal is what? You're never going to drink again. Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
Well, remember I mentioned that person, first of all, their intrinsic motivation, they're probably, I don't want that. Plus their
Yeah.
confidence. Remember, how confident are they? Never drink again? Can I really make that? Maybe, but their confidence. So, but let's increase confidence and say maybe not completely stop drinking. Maybe just drink on the weekends.
12
If they're
drinks?
drinking every day. No, there are anything that's within. I mentioned moderation is about 2 drinks per day per 24-hour period.
24
Some people
period.
might stick to that, but anything below, for an adult male, anything below 5 drinks is at least under binge drinking.
Okay.
So that might be possible, right? And it really depends all on what they are comfortable with. What goals do they have? because this is how you increase confidence. Say, look, you were able to make it the whole week without drinking during the week. You drank on the weekend. Maybe you drank excessively to begin with, but you were able to do it during the week. And it shows that you're making a behavioral change, a behavioral health change. Yeah.
Okay.
So anything, as you know, with behaviorism, it's not something that's going to be immediate, but it's something that has to be practiced over and over and over. And as the person gains confidence, I did drink less, whatever, but it depends on whatever their goal is.
Think of it, then let's go with this too. Let's say they were great for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, whatever, and then they relapse. And then sometimes within the people pleaser, they're like, they were supposed to change. I can't believe they did this. This is why I always say anyone with an addiction disorder will always have that addiction disorder. They're always prone to relapse. This thing that they will change and be like that permanently doesn't factor in. This is my thing that I say is you can't break a habit because we have memory. You can replace it, but once you stop doing the replacement behaviors, you're going to go back to the former of what the behavior was, because your brain always has to do some type of behavior. And if they want to say, I'll do moderation therapy, and let's say they did relapse and did 12 drinks, and then they're great, and then they go back again, and then they're great for a month or two, and then go back again. What would you recommend for those codependent people pleasers?
It's not easy. Recovery is not easy. You have to be honest. Recovery, there's a low rate. It's somewhere between 10 to 17% of people with a substance use disorder actually reach recovery, whatever that definition of recovery is, that they stay in. It is a low rate, and it's not. Again, I don't want people to lose hope, but it's the reality. It's something that is going to be pretty much lifelong. It is a chronic disease. If we look at chronic diseases, being married to somebody who might have a diabetic issue, heart disease, you're in that same category if you have a spouse with a substance use disorder. How committed are you to someone who is going to have a chronic physical illness? But everything you said, it doesn't reflect on you. Oh, it doesn't. Be cautious about that. People have a relapse, which happens, but sometimes the user will externally blame. So they'll blame, oh, it's because of the way you treated me, the way you were talking to me, this and that made me want to go drink. No,
this is where you stop being a people pleaser and go, I'm not responsible for your thoughts, behaviors, or emotions.
Or behavior. Yeah, your behavior. Yeah.
I may be the subject of that, but it's still your choice, and you chose that. And what is one empowering truth that you wish every woman would hold on to, no matter where she is in her journey when it comes to these codependent or people-pleasing behaviors?
Acceptance of reality that whether the person actually recovers from addiction or, like I mentioned, the moderation management, it's not your goal, it's their goal. So if their goal is that they don't want to completely quit drinking, for example, they want to reduce, they want to moderate, they want to manage their moderation, but you want them to completely quit, well, that's not your goal, it's their goal. When the person, if there's no room for compromise, again, the person has their own choices to make in the relationship, understanding that there's no room for compromise, but it's their goal. But ultimately, the person with the addiction has their own goal.
It's just listening to the reality of what the goal is and seeing that if it's a part of you that you're willing to compromise in, and if not, then you got to rethink the relationship.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. Dr. Blanco, for our listeners who want to learn more about your work, connect with you, where can they find you?
They can find me almost all the time at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. As you mentioned, I'm a clinical associate professor teaching all this addiction, and I am the coordinator for the undergraduate degree in addiction studies. So, hey, a lot of people in recovery and a lot of people that have gone through codependency recovery themselves also end up becoming counselors or clinicians and want to become involved in the profession. So if that's something that you're inspired to do and you want to do it, one of my life's goals is I don't want anybody to slip through the cracks, because it's very difficult for some reason. I can talk about our state. I don't know about other states. It's very
Yeah.
difficult to obtain the licensure. I don't want anybody to fall through the cracks. So this is something
Yeah.
that you want to do. I will do
Yeah.
everything I can to ensure that you make it into the profession and get your license. So that's where I'm at. I'll be at occasional addiction conferences. I'm also involved with the National Addiction Professions Committee on Student Engagement.
So normally for my guests, and I don't know if I asked you this in the very beginning when I started my podcast episode, obviously it's evolved. But I'm going to ask you again because we change, our journey always changes, so our answers might change too. I normally ask two questions for my guest. And the first one is, what is your definition of an empowered woman?
Okay, that's a good question. An empowered woman is a woman who's true to herself,
Mm.
no matter what. I think that's the truth is power. So that's empowered. It's true to yourself, no matter what.
Oh, I love that. Yes. And my second question is, assume that in the future, everything that your work, your published stuff that you did, co-authored, everything that you've worked so hard was lost for some unforeseen circumstances. Oh no. And 3 generations from now, your great granddaughter or niece found one letter from you. What truth would you bestow onto her to keep moving forward the supporting women empowerment in her lineage?
Ooh, that is tough because, did you know, I don't have any girls. I
But
have
your
boys.
boys could have
Could have
girls.
girls. Yeah. It's something
Yeah.
I've never considered before. I can't stress it enough. Be true to yourself, but also there's something about in there about humanity. Because again, as a psychologist, I was a humanistic psychologist. All humans deserve everything, really. Go and treat all humans as you would yourself. All humans are important.
Yeah. I love that. And this has been such an eye-opening conversation. Thank you for sharing your expertise and helping us see that addiction isn't just about substances, and it's about anything that takes over your ability to choose freely, including people pleasing. And I know our listeners will take away tools to help them start setting boundaries, reevaluate their relationships, finding their voice, setting the expectations to what is real within their relationships, and stepping into their most authentic self. So thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Empowering Women in Conversations. This conversation has ended, but your journey to empowerment continues. Please share with someone you know who will find this conversation helpful and inspiring. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Until our next empowered conversation with your host, licensed professional counselor, Anita Sandoval. And remember, we are brave. We are strong. We are compassionate. We are women empowered. Go out there and claim your power.